Welcome to Solar Insiders, a podcast reporting on the people, technologies and policies shaping the world's biggest energy source. Presented by Sophie Vorrath, the editor of Renew Economy and One Step Off the Grid, and Rachel Williamson, senior reporter at Renew Economy. Solar Insiders is proudly brought to you by Pylon, the essential solar design tool to grow your solar business with quick and effortless proposals that will impress your customers. And Goodwe, the global solar inverter and energy storage company behind the all-in-one ESA battery system, who are proud to work with Australian cricketer and Goodwe ambassador Alex Carey.
Hello and welcome to Solar Insiders. My name is Sophie Vorrath and I am the editor of Renew Economy. And joining me today is our lead reporter, Rachel Williamson. How are you, Rachel?
I'm well, so. How are you? Dare I ask?
No, I'm very well for this Thursday. It's been a bit of a cray week, but
I know it's been a crazy 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah, I'm going to say that. It's kind of momentum and then just always a conference, always some massive regulatory piece, and then all of the amazing projects that just keep on coming. So, yeah, fascinating times. Now, you were the interviewer this week, and will be the leader of our podcast this week, speaking to Jonathan Pooch from DETA Consulting. Tell us a little bit about that, Rach.
We basically talked about energy productivity, which is much more interesting than it sounds on the tin. We had a really good chat, actually, about the ways that homeowners are told these days, look after your installation before you spend on a battery, do all these other things. But companies they're only just learning to do that. And so saying, there's some pretty basic stuff. If your boiler's got steam coming out of a crack, you should probably deal with that because it will save you 10 to 30% of your energy bill. It's like you could be saving thousands of dollars a year if you just sort out your energy.
The low-hanging fruit, so to speak.
So many low-hanging pieces of fruit, yeah.
Yeah, it's a really under-discussed topic, I think, and you definitely should be the first point of call for so many businesses before you, especially, if you're going to do that, before you then go and get solar and battery and whatever, because you want to make sure that, that side of it is taken care of first so that you know how much you actually need. All right. Well, let's hear from your interview with Jonathan Pooch and we'll come back and discuss the news of the week. Here is Rachel with Jonathan Pooch.
We are talking today with Jonathan Pooch, Jono, as he prefers to be called, who is with DETA Consulting, which is based in Christchurch in New Zealand. Thank you for joining us, Jono.
No problem at all. Thanks for having me.
Now, your team help industries and companies decarbonize, but also part of that is how you go about, how companies go about using energy within their business. Right now, costs across the board are going up, and if they haven't already gone up, they're likely to go up because the US war in Iran is radically pushing up the price of oil. If you hadn't noticed that yet, this is in the context in Australia of pretty woeful energy productivity, which the federal government says improved 1% in the decade to 2024. Now, Jono, your view is that many companies are probably wasting up to about a third of their energy. What are some of these areas of wastage and where is the low-hanging fruit?
Yeah, look, I think there's energy wastage across the board, really. So energy really is a utility that's unseen. It's not necessarily directly linked to productivity or business activity. And therefore, it doesn't necessarily get the same focus that maybe it would around trying to optimize your process or your product line to the same extent. But, examples, I guess, of things that we see is compressed air leakage all over the place. If you can hear a compressed air leak as you wander around your factory, it's probably costing you around $2,000 or $3,000 minimum per year. If you see steam leaks or water leaks, those sorts of things that are easy to walk past and easy to go, look, that's a maintenance item. I've got to wait until I get a maintenance window to do that. But very rarely do we kind of see the cause and effect on this is actually how much this is costing me, and therefore I need to prioritize it in the right way to make sure that I'm doing that maintenance in a timely way. I walked around the factory the other day, and they did have some tags on a steam leak that was from 2 years ago. Like they knew that it was leaking yonks and yonks ago, and in the meantime, it probably cost them again $5,000-$10,000 for a $500 fix. And so I think it's not visible. It's kind of down in the trenches, hard work. It's not, something shiny that you can invest in, but getting the basics right is mission critical to overall performance, and then obviously decarbonisation and sustainability as part of that.
Yeah. Can you give me an example of someone you've helped in Australia and someone you've helped in New Zealand? And what were the sort of things that you were going through and identifying and fixing?
Yeah, sure. So we do a lot of work with Kraft Heinz on both sides of the Tasman. In Kraft Heinz, they use a lot of hot water, they use a lot of steam, they use a lot of electricity. And so some of the things that we were looking at there, for an electricity perspective, they had a lot of refrigeration. Again, both sides, and then I can kind of talk to the differences. A lot of refrigeration. So lots of the set points for refrigeration are geared around optimizing the operator maintenance or the call-outs. And so the question is, by doing that, you're running the system very conservatively. If the compromise on energy efficiency is $1,000, that might be the right option. But if it's $100,000, which there are some instances where that is the case.
What instances is it the case that they're losing $100,000 on refrigeration?
These are things like set points, so this is just very simple. How are we controlling the system, both the suction pressure and the discharge pressure in the refrig setting to minimize energy input, maximize our COP or our coefficient of performance to deliver the best outcome. I mean, we walk around plants at night as part of the work that we do, and often there's stuff that's left on all night. So should that boiler, if we're not operating, does the boiler really need to be on? And it is surprising how often BAU is actually not as energy efficient as it could be. And it's that same thing in a residential sense as well, right? So lots of us have this kind of mindset that we should leave our heat pumps on all the time at home. But the reality is, unless we're turning them on every 6 to 8 seconds, we should always turn them off from an energy efficiency perspective. And so I think there's this latent kind of misunderstanding, I guess, around energy efficiency and the value of energy, and really that
misunderstanding around the tech as well, and how
correct,
the tech works next days.
And the tech changes all the time too. So it is getting better and it is getting easier to control. And some of the challenges that we had a long time ago or a decade ago, some of those same thought processes are still here when actually the tech is much further developed today.
Can you give an example of an idea from a decade or 2 decades ago, which is still around, being used on a new tech? What kind of ideas and what kind of new tech are we talking about?
Yeah, I think, look, lighting, we talk about lighting all the time. Often we get feedback that, lighting, it's more efficient to leave it on, and the energy required to turn it on is very significant. And the same with motors, electric motors. And again, for a certain extent, for a very, very short period of time, that is true. And you do lose a little bit of efficiency if you turn a motor on and off really rapidly. But we're not talking about turning it on and off every 10 seconds, So
we're not all 3-year-olds playing with a light switch.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so actually these days, having the ability to, with digitization of lots of the technology that we're talking about, being able to turn it off. And honestly, it is crazy how many times we go into a plant and say, look, do those lights really need to be on? In a cold store facility, another example around lighting, do you really need to leave everything on? Because actually LEDs will work better if you turn them off and on relative to the old high pressure sodium technology that you might have had previously. So there's this, again, it's just that understanding of the cause and effect around decisions in an energy space, because it is unseen and not necessarily always well understood, that you don't get a great balance on this is my decision, but this is the consequences of my decision, and I really need to understand the consequences to make a full, well-rounded, good decision.
What kind of money are we talking about here? If you can save, if you're wasting 20-30% of the energy that you buy, what sort of money cost are you talking about?
Look, if you haven't done anything as an end user on energy efficiency and you are wasting 10 or 20%, that pretty much translates directly onto your bill. So, there's some big prizes out there to go and get. We've got customers that spend millions of dollars on energy, and we have saved them millions of dollars just on relatively simple efficiency activity. For smaller users, if you're spending $100,000, a good target would be 10% minimum, possibly 20 or 30 if you haven't tackled it previously. Genuinely, that amount of difference is available depending on the sort of organization you are. And lots of that is available for near no capital cost. It requires a bit of human cost and a bit of human effort, but lots of it is just behavior when we start things up, when we turn things off, set points, control, and some basic maintenance things. Insulation is one thing that I see all the time. How many refrigerated insulation pipes have ice around the outside of it? Lots and lots, all over Australia, all over New Zealand. How much hot water pipe work is not insulated and it's too hot to touch? That is a problem. That is heat loss, and we can do better than that.
At a consumer level, at a homeowner level, that's like the first thing that you're told. As children, we are told turn the lights off in the living room. Why are companies and industries missing the same message?
Well, I think part of the reason why it works at home is mum and dad are paying the bill directly and probably talking to their kids quite regularly about how expensive it is. And I think there is some of that, whilst I joke, it does translate to a business setting where there's a disconnect between the cost and those people who have influence on the energy system. So, we talk a lot and we do a lot of work with kind of staff and operator training and education, and no one turns up, or very, very few people turn up to work to do a bad job, right? They want to come to work and do a great job. But the parameters around what that means in an energy space, particularly when they've got so much to think about in and amongst their normal day-to-day activities, if the business owners or the management team can distill that down to, these are the 2 or 3 key things we need you to do. This is the stuff that moves the needle the most on energy. It is whatever it is for that particular business, helping them do a good job and giving them the right information then allows them to get the right outcome. But it is that disconnect, I think, that everyone has this perception that energy is a fixed cost, but actually it's massively variable and there's lots of opportunity for improvement.
Now, you mentioned before that the amount that you can save kind of depends on what you've already done, but also the industry. And so which sectors in Australia and New Zealand, because I imagine they are probably going to be a little bit different, which are most in need of sorting out their energy spending?
Yeah, that is a great question. I think lots around commercial buildings in Australia are significantly better than New Zealand if we're doing a comparison. And correct. Part of the reason for that is it's a bit warmer in Australia. This is very surprising compared to New Zealand. So the heating requirement is a little bit less. So the actual energy you need to put into the space is less. So your opportunity then is a little bit less. But also in Australia, there's a rating system, the NABERS rating system, which helps benchmark different spaces, and it helps provide some goalposts for what landlords or building owners need to do. That doesn't exist in New Zealand to anywhere near the same extent. And therefore, there's quite a difference in commercial building performance. The flip side of that, though, is in the industrial, particularly the food and the agricultural sector, not so much mining. Mining, the energy use is very directly related to production because it's very big, heavy equipment that is what drives their energy. And so energy is much closer aligned to productivity. But anywhere like a food space where you've got hot water or steam or refrigeration, where the product flow is disconnected from the energy flow is where those opportunities exist, because generally speaking, the focus is on product, not on utilities and energy.
And I think New Zealand's a bit further ahead than Australia in that, because there's been a bit more government help in the last government, I think, around adding heat pumps and so on.
Yeah, correct. So if I was doing a comparison between Australia and New Zealand is further ahead on reducing energy demand and looking at energy efficiency. And the main reason for that is because of the government focus and the government, drive towards being more efficient. And New Zealand's inherent renewable electricity base has meant that we haven't had to do as much here on things like solar or other renewable generation activities. Australia is well ahead on renewable electricity generation in terms of solar rollout particularly, but also biogas and a few other renewable supply type activities. But also the underlying energy cost in Australia has been lower than New Zealand. So some of the economics and the drive for focus on efficiency has been a little bit more in New Zealand just because of pure economics as much as...
Yeah, those gas prices are crazy.
Correct.
And the electricity prices are pretty crazy as well sometimes.
Correct.
What does that change the advice that you give to countries on it? Does the national context change the advice that you give? What are you telling Australian companies? What are you telling New Zealand companies when it comes to, do you need to be reducing gas faster in New Zealand? Does it matter so much in Australia? Do you want to be adding more, rooftop solar in Australia than New Zealand? What are you telling people?
Yeah, I think at a high level, the advice is very similar. So for us, I guess the key takeaways around what everyone should be doing is understand the energy use on site and really test what best practice is for you in your context, and really create that plan and that roadmap to net zero, 50% reduction, whatever your target is, and let's make good decisions to get from A to B. And I think that advice translates across Australia and New Zealand. Plan well, understand the BAU, and understand where you're going. In terms of the actual path underneath that, though, it is likely that the advice is very different between countries. So government policy and availability of funding and support does dictate economics and relative investment. So in Australia, support around solar is much greater than New Zealand. So solar generation, if you don't have it, is something you should probably consider. In New Zealand, it's very much geared around reducing energy usage first. The other thing for us would be, in New Zealand, would be gas is significantly higher cost than pretty much anything else. So if you have gas, let's try and tackle gas as quickly as we can. And again, that's an economic decision as much as anything. In Australia, it's much more even, and so there would be much more conversation around electricity relative to gas, particularly when coupled with a solar type conversation where you might have excess solar during the day relative to during the night, and you might have some load shifting type conversation to make the most of the solar that you've got on site, for example.
Okay. So that load shifting conversation is very much one that you'd be having with Australian businesses and saying, well, how do we change the way you run your business?
Correct.
To account for the free electricity that you might be able to get yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And for us, again, it's not about saying that you must do this, but it's challenging the status quo and going, well, look, if you had no net electricity cost during this period between 8 and 5, what can we shoehorn and put in there? And often it's not everything. Like it's not like you can configure your whole business necessarily to run only between those times when it's sunny outside. But there will be, again, operators do have decisions that they make around when certain things turn on, when we're running this part of our process that that you can tweak and adjust and make some little adjustments, and lots of little adjustments add up to quite a big percentage if you can get that all lined up together.
And I guess it goes back to those ideas from a decade or two ago where, once upon a time, shoehorning all those electricity intensive parts of your operation into like a nighttime period when then costs were really low. And it's actually sort of asking people to think about flipping them over and putting them in the middle of the day instead.
Yep, exactly. I mean, and again, we talked earlier about the culture and some of those perceptions that we have. It is still relatively low cost at night relative to the peak during the day. We now just in Australia have this other period where it's very, very low or possibly even negative during the day. That's this whole new kettle of fish that we can then start to shoehorn some of that, be it at residential or business type level.
And I guess if you're big enough to start talking about PPAs and power purchase agreements, and or very good deals with retailers, then that starts to really shift the dial during the day.
Correct.
Now, we've been talking about energy productivity at an industry and a company level. I probably should have explained at the start what that is. It's basically the amount of energy that you use to deliver whatever product or service that you sell. And so the counter to that is the more energy you lose or you waste through heat or leaving lights on or whatever, the less productive you are. So in Australia, it's improved a bit, but not because anyone is actually improving their energy use. It's because energy-intensive manufacturing is actually dropping out of the economy a bit, and because GDP growth is outstripping energy demand. So, John, I'm actually curious whether you guys have any data or failing data, sort of lived experience about what the impact of reducing this huge amount of energy waste is having at an economy-wide scale or even like at an industry-wide scale.
Yeah, so I don't have great data at an economy-wide scale, apart from to say that energy productivity is a massive issue for all countries, and because it is related to decarbonisation and the transformation of the economy that needs to happen. And I think from my perspective, if we talk about some of those existential things that we're seeing at the moment, the geopolitics, energy sovereignty, the ability for Australia and New Zealand to find their place in a new world with so much money that has to go into a decarbonised future, actually getting the basics right around efficiency and productivity. So those two for me go quite closely hand in hand. It is an economic imperative at a national level to do that, because otherwise we have to spend so much more money on capital and infrastructure and investment, and we are so much more exposed to foreign sovereign risk. And energy is taking even the economic cost of the energy out. It is actually something that all citizens of a country want and need to grow themselves, but also the economy and the country more generally. And I think, that's great on a big national scale, but at an individual scale, we've got businesses that we've worked with, say a glasshouse facility where they were using coal in their facility. They basically couldn't get the coal and they weren't going to get consent for that. They needed to be hyper-focused on efficiency followed by their fuel supply. They could reduce their net energy cost by about 80% by doing that and getting away from coal. They had to invest some capital, but if they didn't do that, they wouldn't exist. So their business couldn't continue without the heat, and that it couldn't continue in its current form to make the tomatoes that then, feed the local communities. But they had to tackle it in a systematic way, in a practical way. Otherwise, without being more productive, that organisation wasn't going to survive. And I think we are going to see that more and more, particularly in some areas, and glass houses are a great example of that. They are very acutely tied to energy costs because it's the gas cost or the coal cost that's going in to then provide the heat for the glass house. And unless we're all comfortable paying twice as much for tomatoes or lettuces or whatever it is in the supermarket, they need to be much more efficient to allow, that wider system to actually work.
It's right across the food production board, really, isn't it? I've covered, an abattoir that had to shift because their gas prices were just eye-watering. You've got the Mars factory up in Albany, Wodonga, in Australia, which is use some very experimental technologies, but they have to because they use so much heat, they use so much electricity. They need to.
Yeah, and we're doing some work with Bundaberg, which obviously marquee Australian brand. If they don't maintain and enhance efficiency, energy is a top 5 cost for them. And actually, unlike some costs like labour and raw materials and transport, they have a high degree of control on this particular cost. Organisations don't always see it as a high degree of control, but this is one of few where you do actually have a very high degree of control. And I think it's that challenge for every business is to get as proactive as possible and hyper vigilant on reducing energy cost as much as you can.
Jonathan Pooch, thanks for joining us on Solar Insiders.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
G'day, Alex Carey here. The GoodWe ESA all-in-one home storage solution is here, and it's a game changer. It's packed with market-leading features, full home backup and 6-level battery protection. With up to 48 kilowatt hours in a single stack, the ESA is a breeze to install with no gateway needed. The GoodWe ESA series is available now and priced to cover the 2026 drop in the rebate. Visit goodwe.com.au for more information.
That was Jonathan Pooch. A really interesting discussion, Rachel, with a little bit of a New Zealand twist.
Yeah, you give me that sort of interview, I can't help myself.
No, of course not. Of course not. You have to catch up on what's going on. And what is going on?
I had to restrain myself from being like, look, it's just better there, isn't it?
Well, it's funny, isn't it? Like sometimes in those smaller markets, there are more on top of certain things, and I think that's where Australia has been similarly so in the world stage. There's been some areas where we've been able to lead, and I think New Zealand is a bit similar because it's just, a pretty unique
It's different.
environment.
There's different challenges, there's different pressure points that you don't have here, that you might have there. But here, once again, like Jono, as you preferred, said, there's different. You have to have a different conversation here because gas is not the pressing issue that it is in New Zealand.
Yeah. And our dear leader, Giles Parkinson, just came back from a holiday in New Zealand and just said that he was blown away by how far ahead they are on electric vehicles. Like, just chargers, in particular, the charging infrastructure is actually keeping up, it seems, with the shift, whereas that's not generally the message you get here. It's good to see a little bit more of that here, I say. Now, news of the week. I think one of the big things this week is two big things are happening today. And one of them hasn't quite happened yet, so I can't talk to that. But the default market offer is being revealed, or the draft at least, this afternoon by the Australian Energy Regulator, which will give us a bit of an idea where electricity prices are headed. I'm going to take a stab and say slightly down, but which is what happened with Victoria.
Yeah, are they going to follow Victoria? That's going to be interesting.
Well, they quite often don't, and that's been one of the things that people have been cross about, and they're also in the midst of reviewing how they set this default market price, which is, a sort of odd thing in itself, and I won't go into all of that because it's quite convoluted, believe it or not, crazy. But it does sort of serve as a bit of a bellwether on general prices and where everything's headed. And it's a bit of a funny time, I suppose, because they would have been preparing all of this and thinking, oh, we're heading in this direction. And then, of course, a few missiles later.
Geopolitics happens.
We're not really. And things are, suddenly we've got rates going up and petrol prices going up, and
the Treasurer saying inflation could be 5%.
Yes. So, yeah, I think that we'll take these drafts, and then we will see what they come out with in the future. But it will be interesting to see, and it will be interesting to see whether at least we can sort of pour some cold water on the hysteria that coming from certain parts of politics that, everything's just going up, because of renewables, which again, won't go into that. The other thing is the AEMC, the Energy Market Rulemaker, came out today with a directions paper on what it proposes to do to sort of help usher the gas distribution network companies through the looming gas death, the network death spiral that's really well underway, which has sort of been driven by people electrifying their homes and enjoying cheaper solar and having batteries, and also being driven in some states by policy to decarbonise. There've been a bit of a push, or quite a concerted push, from some of the consumer groups and justice groups warning that, these gas companies that have probably spent quite a lot on their assets are going to be looking for someone to help them pay for those, even if they are not being used, and that we need to protect consumers and that rules need to change. So that's really interesting. And the AEMC is more or less agreeing. It's proposing a sort of sweet little package of regulation changes. But it's also saying, regulation isn't going to do it all. There's going to have to be some help from government, which is interesting for them to come out and say that the government's going to have to step in and do some stuff, and probably there'll be some compensating and such that needs to be done. So it's a really important, but I think two of the key things that I would take away from it are that basically they're saying that, if they do end up with stranded assets, they're not going to be able to transfer that cost onto consumers. So that's in black and white there. In the meantime, they're saying that we want to, lengthen the outlook period, and we want to make sure that gas companies are doing everything they can to recover costs in the best possible way while they can. But if they suddenly wind up with stranded assets, that's not going to
kind of just sucks to be them, really.
Yeah. Well, I think that the wording in the report is, like in most competitive markets, if you suddenly lose consumers, it's on you. So yeah, and I think the feeling is there's been probably sufficient warning. Like we've known about this for quite some time now. So we'll give you more. We'll give you more warning. We'll give you more chance to do the right thing and to. But the other key takeaway, and I like this one, is that they're not allowed to, request revenue to spend money basically and recover revenue on demand growth. Like that word is not going to be able to be, those two words out. No such thing anymore. So yeah, no growth for you. It's just down and deal with that part. So that's really
the end is nigh.
The end is nigh. So it's a positive thing, I think. I haven't really heard from the two groups who put in the rule change requests that's kind of driven this, but I imagine they'll be pretty happy. I'm not sure. We'll see. And what else, Rach? You had a really interesting story about some sort of fancy new solar technology that.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
A little company called Phoenix.
With no vowels.
Apologies if I have said that incorrectly, but it is PHNXX, so Phoenix. They have a solar, reasonable sized solar panel system that they put in the container and then just pull out with a tractor, sort of clown car like. You just get this huge. And they're doing an exhibition next week because their first Australian installation is at a dairy farm near Colac in Western Victoria. And this farmer has a 105 kilowatt system with a 240 kilowatt hour battery to back it up so that he can actually use the solar when he needs it, which is pre-dawn and after dark at night. Yeah, it's a really interesting little idea, because suddenly, instead of that obviously aiming at farms, construction sites that might want to pack it up and put it somewhere else.
Some off-grid industrial stuff. That goes
anywhere
on.
where you might want to have some solar and then take it somewhere else, but have like a significant amount of solar in a battery. And so it's
Festivals.
Yeah. But yeah, it's a really interesting idea, because the farmer said to me, we see all these old dairies in our area that spend a lot of money on solar putting on their roofs, and they're not operating as dairies anymore, so they don't need it. He's like, if we retire, I can sell this system to someone else and they can have it, and they can just put it on the truck and take it to wherever they want. And
I think even moving it around your own farm, because I remember at one of the renewables and agriculture conferences, one of the big beefs that farmers have is that if they put a big solar system in one part of their farm, that's great for those operations. But the way that the grid works, the other parts of their huge farms are not on the same thing, and they can't even share that electricity with themselves, like on that one property, because they're so vast. So to be able to sort of pick it up and move it around, I mean, I'm sure there's a little bit involved. It's probably not as easy as all of that, but yeah, it sounds like a very clever idea.
Yeah. And the co-founder, Wei Chi, he was telling me about their other first installation, but it's in Singapore. It's powering a vertical farm in a port in Singapore. And so whenever they need to, so the vertical farm is in containers, and obviously it has all the hydroponics and UV and everything, so it needs a fair bit of power. But it's a port, so sometimes they're going to need the space where the vertical farm is, and so they just pack it all up, shift it slightly different place in the port, and keep going.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and I imagine for that kind of thing where you've got the infrastructure to move containers around pretty easily, that would really work. Yeah, no, it's a really good idea, and it's just always encouraging to see that this kind of innovation is still going on and that different needs are being met, because solar is such a versatile technology, really.
Especially when you put a battery with it.
Yes, exactly.
Because that's what this farmer said. It was like, we looked at solar. It's not going to work for us because we farm in the nighttime. We do our dairy in the nighttime.
The milking and the, yeah.
Yeah. And he said with the battery, makes it very sensible.
Okay. Fantastic.
It always comes back to the batteries these days, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It does. It's the storage, which, again, farmers will be well across with the water situation. So very similar thing. And the other thing to put on the radar is that we are now, well, we're sort of 6 weeks out from the first changes to the battery rebate and the home battery rebate, and the Clean Energy Regulator, which oversees the small-scale renewable energy scheme, which that is under, just sent out a little warning yesterday to retailers and industry saying that time's running out for you to basically offer the original rebate on the original design of the scheme to customers. Like, it really wants people to start being realistic about what they can get done in these last 6 weeks, and to not sort of overpromise and underdeliver.
Yeah, don't be promising the same price for the week to go. You are probably not going to be able to do that.
Because I think the rebate kicks in once the battery is actually connected. So that's all important to know. You can't sort of lock it in on the last day of April and get the rebate. So that's something that everyone and for certain size battery systems, as the regulator says, it could mean thousands of dollars of difference in the rebate that you get back. And of course, they're trying to encourage people with the changes to go a bit smaller. The message is no longer bigger is better. It's more about size to what you need, and spread that. I want more people to use the battery rebate and for less huge systems, basically. And so hopefully that will work. But yeah, just a big warning. And they've got a very useful tool on their website where you can actually calculate the difference from now to when the new settings come in per size. And you can see, like, it shows you the amount of STCs, and you then have to actually use some maths. But yeah, it's a big difference for some of the batteries. So whereas for some of the smaller ones, it won't make that much of a difference. So yeah. And that, I think, brings us all up to date, Rachel. Anything else to add?
Nope.
Nope. Alrighty, well.
Nothing for the Solar Insiders crowd, that is.
No, we can talk about the weather later. Well, thank you so much for that interview with Jono Pooch. That was really interesting, and it's a really important reminder that that's something that we all need to think about. Houses, businesses, everybody, save energy when you can. And we will see you next week with the next episode of Solar Insiders. In the meantime, thank you so much for listening. Thank you to all of our Renew Economy readers. Thank you to our sponsors, Pylon and Goodwe. And yes, we'll see you in about a week's time. Bye for now.
Solar Insiders was brought to you by Goodwe. Across residential and commercial installations, Goodwe's all-in-one ESA battery solutions support the solar industry with reliable, flexible energy storage. From rooftops to large projects, Goodwe is helping installers and businesses deliver smarter, clean energy outcomes. Discover more at goodwe.com.au. Solar Insiders is also brought to you by Pylon. Pylon provides easy-to-use solar design software for solar installers and retailers with pay-as-you-go pricing, no monthly costs and no lock-in contracts. Join Australia's top solar companies who trust Pylon to design high-resolution, CEC-ready solar proposals.